to you live right now on YouTube, whether you're listening to us after the fact on Spotify or wherever you consume podcasts, or watching us after the fact on YouTube. We appreciate you joining. And this episode, we are going over the 3-point era right now after 2010 and 2011, and leading in the show with the samples of the Brickyard merch is none other than Brick Jameson, bringing us the worst top 5 3-point shooters of all time. That's right, you heard it. A special edition because we're keeping the top fives going all year long, not just during the football season right now. Going over the worst NBA shooters of all time in the most shocking and controversial top 5 list in sports history, some say at least.
Some may say. And we're going to talk about the Steph effect later on in the show. We'll be talking about the pillars of excellence, but now we were talking about the pillars of disgrace from the 3-point hash. This is the worst top 5 shooters of all time, according to the Brickyard. Honorable mention, statistically speaking, Vlad Divac with an impressive 23.5% from the slash. That's right, 23% from Vlade Divac. He attempted over 1,000 threes and yet made only 23%. If you flipped a quarter 4 times, Vlade Divac probably missed it all 4 times. As an
Don't
honorable
shoot.
mention, don't shoot Vlade, is what they said. At number 5, I feel like there is no 3-point list of infertility if I don't have Shaq on this list. Shaq, 1 of 22 from the 3-point hash in his career. I will say, you can find it on video, his one and only 3-pointer ever made. So you know what? He at least made one. He made more 3 points than we did. So that's something that we can't take away from Shaquille O'Neal, an all-time great. At number 4, how about infamously one of the worst shooters of all time? That's right, Andre Miller. This man shot 100 and he shot 888 total threes, and he made a total of 193, a total of 21.7% from 3. Pathetic, dare I say it. At number 3, we have none other than somebody, when it comes to infamously terrible playoff performances, the guy who was the pillar of disgrace when it comes to playoff performers, actually, statistically, the worst playoff performer in NBA history. Of course, I'm talking about playoff Julius Randle. Julius Randle from the hash, 28 of 99, 28% from 3 in the playoffs. When it matters most, you're hitting rim more often than not with Mr. Randle. At number 2, I have a guy that they say don't shoot. And most of the time he didn't shoot. But when he did, he missed. Of course, I'm talking about the one and only Ben Simmons at number 2. Ben Simmons has attempted 36 threes in his career, and he's made all but 5. So Ben Simmons, when it comes to the worst 3-point shooters of all time, the reason why he doesn't shoot threes is simply for the fact he can't shoot threes. So Ben Simmons, we keep him at number 2. Now, at number 1 is a guy who shoots at a pretty terrible clip historically, actually is statistically a bottom 5 3-point shooter of all time for people who have attempted over 3,000 threes in their career, something that Vlade Divac, Shaq, Andre Miller, playoff Julius Randle, and Ben Simmons cannot say. At number 1, this guy at one point had attempted more threes in a single season than Klay Thompson, who is probably going to be somewhere on the best top 5 somewhere. I'm talking about Marcus Smart. This guy, if he had the confidence, this guy believes he is Steph Curry, but he is instead not Seth Curry. He is a lonely, autistic, ugly cousin of the Curry family. He attempted over 3,000 threes in his career. He is a bottom 5 3-point percentage of all time, shooting a measly 32% from the 3-point line, but yet has averaged almost 7 threes per game in his career at one point. So Marcus Smart, simply for the fact of the amount of threes that he shoots and the little amount that do go in, the worst 3-point shooter of all time, simply for the fact of all the times he took it away from the greats in the Celtics, whether it be the Peyton Pritchards or the Jason Tatums or the Jaylen Browns, the worst 3-point shooter by far, Marcus Smart.
Absolutely, it is Marcus Smart, and what a hell of a list, and what a creative list as far as the worst 5 3-point shooters of all time. Definitely a huge shout out to Vlad Divac. Not sure who had the pleasure of having him on their team. I don't really remember him. My history is a little rough when it comes to Blood ID Box. Sorry, it just is. And then Andre Miller. That is a pull, but that is definitely a great shout out for someone who took a lot of threes, did not make a lot of threes in his career, and playoff Julius Randle definitely a concern, and the Timberwolves will definitely find that out in the first round when they go up against the Thunder.
So you want to know what Vlade Divac is known for? He is the guy who was traded for Kobe Bryant from the Lakers. The Lakers said, Vlade Divac, as much as we love your 23% three-point percentage, let's trade for this high school guy named Kobe Bean Bryant. I don't know who won that trade, but I don't think it was the guy who got Vlade Divac. He went to the Hornets, and then he ultimately played for the Kings. But yeah, that's the guy that we're thinking of. The guy that ultimately will become the trivia story question in the future. So that's what we know Vlade Divac from.
Yeah, no, that's what we know Vlad ID Bach from. And, with him, he's like kind of, I don't know, when you get traded for Kobe Bryant, it's pretty tough to live up to that name, I feel like. And then you're also the worst 3-point shooter of all time. I mean, it's just a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, he somehow made the Hall of Fame though, which I'm very surprised by. One-time All-Star Vlade Divac, by the way. He's in the Hall of Fame. The NBA saw his three-point percentage and said, "We got to get this guy in here." So now he is in the Hall of Fame, enshrined with the greats, like guys who feature on the best of the best top 5 lists of three-point shooting excellence.
Yeah, and we have also the top 5 3-point shooters of all time. So we're gonna not only give you the worst 3-point shooters in NBA history, but we're also gonna give you the top 5. And I'm gonna give a shout out to Ray Allen because, well, Ray Allen is a great 3-point shooter, and he is number 3 all time. I just think he's someone who kind of paved the way for this era of 3-point shooting right now, and he just can't hold a candle to some of the stuff that's going on in the modern NBA era as far as 3-point shooting and off the dribble. So now I'm going to go over the top 5 3-point shooters of all time, according to the Brickyard podcast. And at number 5, we have Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard is a player who's kind of really reinvented the 3-point shot because he's someone who's in the same era as Steph Curry, and he's kind of like Steph Curry, but just a little bit worse, where he wasn't able to win in his prime because with Portland, he wasn't with an organization that was as good as Golden State. But Damian Lillard is already number 4 all time, having only played 882 games so far in his career. That is 100 plus some less than Steph Curry. So he's played 110 games less than Steph Curry. That is almost 400 games less than Ray Allen and about 200 games less than James Harden, who's also ahead of him on this list. So Damian Lillard has been one of the best 3-point shooters. And then when you think of him, you have some iconic threes as well, which kind of brings the whole thing together. Where you think of Damian Lillard, you think of that shot over Paul George versus Oklahoma City. You think of that 3-point shot over the Rockets when he won his rookie season. So at number 5, we have Damian Lillard, who is number 4 on the all-time 3-pointers made list. And then at number 4, we have none other than James Harden on this list. James Harden is someone who at one point in the league, we are having conversations, and the narrative around him is he the best offensive player of all time in the regular season, where he was doing things where only Michael Jordan had done things before. He was having 50-point triple doubles in his sleep. He was pretty much averaging 33 points, 11 rebounds, and 10 assists going back and forth. And he'd have some crazy games where he'd have 20 assists, but his step back 3 off of the dribble really changed the game. And he's number 2 all time on 3-pointers made. And he's only played about 1,100 games, and he's made 3,106 threes. And he's played 200 games less than Ray Allen, and he's also made over 200 threes more than Ray Allen. So pretty much for every less game that he's played than Ray Allen. He's made a three there. So he's definitely improved. And then he's an MVP caliber player who really shined with shooting the 3 point shot off of the dribble. So I have to give James Harden some love here and put him at number three. At number at number three, we have Clay Thompson, who has made 2,648 threes and played 847 games. So about 150 less games than Steph Curry. When you think of Clay Thompson, you have to think of not only how people shoot threes in the regular season, where he's pretty much been Ray Allen alongside Steph Curry, and then he's also has the quickest release. So as far as a pure 3 point shot, the pure shooter is going to gravitate towards Clay Thompson, where that's the purest shot of all time with Clay Thompson. Then the player who can get the hottest, where he can have 50 points and maybe only dribble the ball 11 times, where he's the same player that had 39 points in a quarter, where no one has gotten hotter than Clay Thompson. And then you think of the Oklahoma City game when they were down 3-1, game six, Clay, when he hits six threes versus the Oklahoma City Thunder to propel them to the NBA Finals. And then you think of all of these massive performances where Klay Thompson has come up huge for the Warriors in the playoffs. So Klay Thompson has to get love here at number five, making 2,648 threes with 847 games. So he is number five on the all time 3 point made list. And at number two, we have another Golden State Warrior, but he plays for their team this season. And that's right, I'm putting Buddy Hield at number two. He's someone who's on this list, and it's not crazy because he's only played 694 games. The next most played games on this list is Kyrie Irving at 779, and Buddy Hield already has 2,000. He already has over 2,000 threes made. He's made 2,082. So realistically, next season, Buddy Hield could be a top 10 3 point shooter of all time. And he's played less than 700 games, where pretty much every other player on the season on this list has a full season over Buddy Hield. So I think Buddy Hield could end up being one of the top 3 point shooters of all time. And he could end up finishing number two, potentially number three or four all time. And he has a chance to really prove it in the playoffs this year with the Golden State Warriors, with Steph Curry, with Jimmy Butler, with Gary Payton Jr. So at number two, have to put Buddy Hield there just because numbers wise, he's set up to potentially be the number two 3 point shooter of all time. But at number one, obviously it's Steph Curry. Steph Curry revolutionized the game. Steph Curry changed the way basketball is played today, where pretty much every other team shoots more threes because of Steph Curry. Every player wants to shoot threes now because of Steph Curry. All it took was one night in Madison Square Garden where Steph Curry went out there and dropped 54 points. And ever since then, he's been dominating the NBA. And, it kind of feels like his era is over and we're not in the Steph Curry era anymore. But I feel like he does have more to offer. He's already number one all time in 3 pointers made, and it's by a ridiculous margin. He has uh, pretty much 900 more threes than the next closest player with 1,009 games played. So he's played less games than all of these players. So it's like Steph Curry, like revolutionized just shooting the ball off the dribble. He's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. We can do that now.
Yeah, I think Steph Curry is a great number one. He revolutionized the game. If you look at what we'll go over today, we'll talk about the pre Steph Curry era, and then with as soon as he joined the league, essentially how the league adapted to his play style. The 3 point shot, they call it the 3 point revolution from 2009 to today, where we're seeing people shoot anywhere between 15, 20, 30, maybe half of their shots are shot through the 3 point line now. We're seeing teams like the Celtics adopt it. Obviously, the Warriors revolutionized it, but the Steph Curry effect is something that we'll talk about today and how he's impacted the game unlike any player of the last 25 years.
Yeah, because like you're looking at the top 25 players in the league today, and they're all from Steph's era. Like number one, Steph Curry. Number two, James Harden. He like kind of created that play style that allowed James Harden to do what he does. And Mike D'Antoni was his head coach, and Mike D'Antoni's already a pretty fast-paced head coach. He's kind of the Chip Kelly of the NBA. If he could actually get to the conference championship, and then you have um, Damian Lillard, Klay Thompson, and then Kyle Korver's kind of before his era, but after that you have Paul George, Kevin Durant, Eric Gordon, Buddy Hield, CJ McCollum, 21, J.R. Smith, Mike Conley, Kyrie Irving, JJ Redick before that. And then you have some players from the era previous to that, like LeBron James, um, Paul Pierce, Dirk Nowitzki, Jason Kidd. And then, so you can kind of see like where J.R. Smith and J.J. Redick as well. Like you can kind of see that this kind of started to materialize in the era before, where you also have like Vince Carter and Jamal Crawford on the top 25 as well here. And then really Reggie Miller and Ray Allen were the foundational players to kind of breaking the door open for the three-point shot and showing it could be a real X factor. But it's interesting to see Paul Pierce and Ray Allen on that kind of like a OG splash duo where they're both in the top 15 as far as three-point shooters, and they both would have been top 10 a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think Ray Allen at one point was considered the greatest 3-point shooter of all time. When he retired, he certainly was. And then Steph Curry came in and shattered all of his records. He shattered, if you look at the single season 3-point record, it's Steph Curry a million times. We'll go over that in a minute. But with Ray Allen, he kind of was the original, to some extent, Steph Curry to a lesser degree. And then Paul Pierce was one of those guys that also um, kind of helped invigorate the 3-point shot, where the 3-point shot became a quintessential part of Paul Pierce's game. And having those guys together for that short period of time with the Celtics, I think also helped to invigorate the 3-point shot as well. Um, those guys laid the foundation, but then obviously Steph Curry came in, and I always think about the 2016 season, which was like, if you want to talk about God in human form in our lifetime, 2016 Steph Curry was that guy. He made 402 threes when the record previously held was 286. The record initially before that was Ray Allen with 269. Steph Curry has broken that 10 separate times at this point. He went from 286 to 402. And I remember watching this graphic when this had happened, and it's equivalent to hitting 104 home runs in baseball. It's equivalent to throwing for 75 touchdowns in Madden or in the NFL. Same thing.
75 touchdowns. That's crazy. Like 50 touchdowns. Like when Patrick Mahomes did that, it felt like a Steph Curry type season, but they had done it before. But like 75 touchdowns, it's like people think that passing is an issue in the NFL right now, but it's like I feel like the 3-point problem is a much bigger issue in the NBA than just like the passing rules in the NFL. Because if you look at like the equivalents in other sports, it's like basketball accelerated on a unprecedented level in one aspect of the sport that's kind of just made it like routine.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And it's funny because when I look at the single season records, it goes Steph Curry with that 2016 season, James Harden, and then it goes Steph Curry, Steph Curry, Steph Curry, Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, James Harden, Paul Pierce, and then we see Steph Curry pretty much every single season that he's played in the NBA. He's been on the single season all time list. And I'm curious where he is this season. I haven't looked exactly how many threes he's made, but he is the definition of the 3-point god at this point. I don't know where else we could put him.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's an argument. He's number one. It's interesting to see like the foundation of it to be set of the 3-point shot because I feel like the 3-point shot before Steph Curry, like the way I remember it, I distinctly remember watching basketball and 3-point shots. It was always like a set shot. It was never really off of the dribble where you would have some 3-point shots, but it felt like you would have like your shooters, then you'd have like your power forwards who would kind of be like your jump shooters maybe, and then the centers really didn't do anything. Where now with Steph Curry made everyone essentially have to shoot threes or you're going to be useless on the court defensively. So you at least have to have the threat of the 3-point shot. So it ended up like kind of pushing it to a whole new level where the Warriors increased it with the positionless basketball, and that's really what moved it forward. But since essentially 2010 and 2011. It's increased each year as far as the 3 point attempts in the NBA. And then it increased over the last two seasons, rising from 22% in 2010 and 2011, and then 39% last season. And then it increased more in the last 5 years than it did in the previous five. And then in 2016, there were six teams that took one third of their shots from the 3 point line. And then last season, 28 of the 30 teams did so. And the only two teams who didn't were Washington and San Antonio, who are 31% respectively from three.
Yeah, I think the 3 point revolution has been pretty substantial. You talked about the pre Steph Curry era. When I remember the NBA, when I first started watching it before Steph Curry, it was almost as if they were an equivalent to like the enforcer in hockey, where there was this one guy that was designated to be the fighter. In the NBA, it was the Ray Allen, it was the Kyle Korver, it was the guy who was essentially the 3 point specialist. JJ Redick, I think, would fall into that same group of things where you had your mid range shooters like the Carmelo Anthony's and the Kobe Bryant's of the world, your essential scorers. And it didn't really matter whether they were the 3 point shooters or not. Michael Jordan wasn't historically a great 3 point shooter either. But you had your guys like the Steve Kerrs who were on the Bulls. And then you had everybody that I mentioned earlier. They were sort of like a specialist. But then Steph came in with crazy handles and a 3 point shot that we've never seen before. And it's changed the way we play the game. One of the statistics that we saw was the season he started in the NBA, the average 3 point percentage, um, meaning like the amount of threes that they shoot compared to other shots, was 22%. And now it hovers anywhere between 30% and 50% any given night with people. Typically, it seems like every other shot at this point is a 3 point shot ultimately.
Yeah, no, it's pretty routine that you'll have like kind of like a volley back and forth of just 3 point shots. And it is like an interesting part of the game because like I feel like dunks can get boring. And that was the complaint before in the NBA. It's like dunking is too easy. Dunking isn't interesting. So they're like, okay, if people like aren't that interested in dunks anymore and the dunk contest is losing popularity, let's shift over to the 3 point shot. But when you have it that in 2015 and 2016, one third of the NBA. Um, Only six teams in the NBA took one third of their shots from three. And now last season, only two teams out of the 28 teams in the NBA didn't do that. Like, that's such a rapid progression in the NBA. That's like having one third. It's like in the NFL, it's like passing like pretty much every single time. You only run like 10% of the time in the NFL, but you pass 90% of the time. It's like Anthony Richardson, how much he dominates the ball essentially.
Yeah, no, it's insane. It's insane how much it's changed. And the parallels, I don't know if there's another sport that could have this sort of revolution in one aspect of the game so dramatically, the way that the NBA has had it. Because like baseball, I guess it would be the home run ball, but ultimately that's always been a part of the game, the glue of it. And then in bat, and you mentioned in football, it's been passing. And we look at teams like in the past, like the Chiefs, for example, early on in their dynasty, didn't really run the ball very much. The Bucks with Brady didn't really run the ball very much. We're starting to see it turn back over to the running back. But the 3 point, I don't see it dying anytime soon. I think ultimately what happened with the 3 point shot is that once when it began to gain popularity, ultimately you saw guys like Dwight Howard, who was the face of the league at one point before it, or at least one of the main stars. And then as soon as he could basically not shoot threes, he kind of fizzled out of the league. And there's a number of other big men that ultimately kind of fizzled out from there. The DeMarcus Cousins, the I can name a million other guys that fall into that same umbrella. But ultimately, the big men that couldn't shoot threes, once when the Steph Curry era was officially underway, you saw them fizzle out, or they essentially needed to adapt, or else they were essentially going to be written off in the NBA.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting story for the NBA because I feel like it is one of those things where it's such a dramatic jump. especially in a sport where it's like, well, Steph's equivalent for breaking Ray Allen's 3-point record would be the equivalent of Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow throwing for 75 touchdowns in an NFL season. Like, that's absolutely ridiculous stuff. So, like, I just can't see it happening in any other sport now. It's like some of it is people like talking about the rules, like making it easier to score, but like at the same time, like sure we have made it easier, but the skill set still needs to be there to make threes. And I feel like it's just become more analytic analytic driven. And I feel like just because coaches and players have become more talented and smarter, now people think the game's a weaker product because it doesn't look as hard as it did before. Where if you jack up a bunch of threes and you're able to make like a good percentage of them and outpace the other team and you win, it's not the most interesting thing to watch, but you are kind of watching a chess match on display, and 3-point shooting can be entertaining. But like, do you think basketball just kind of looks easier and it kind of just looks lazier and maybe it doesn't look as hard as it did where you would have your small forward who's your defensive guy, where maybe it's a Andre Robertson or Tabo Cephalosha with the Thunder who couldn't shoot threes. You'd have your one shooter like Danny Green, and then you just have like your point guard, your small forward scorer, your power forward who maybe he shot threes, maybe he didn't, and then your center. Like it feels like maybe basketball just looked harder before.
I think basketball looked harder for a number of reasons because I think each player had their own aspect of the game that they could use. But now at this point in the NBA, everybody has to have essentially every part of their game utilized. Maybe defense isn't necessarily as important, but we know that when the playoffs come, that's not necessarily the case. But in the past, it was like Michael Jordan and Kobe and Carmelo and all these other great scorers of the past were really great at ultimately slashing. Allen Iverson's another guy I would mention, and that looked a lot more complicated because they had to use their handles to be successful, and they had their mid range, and it just looked more exciting. But now, like Steph Curry can pull up from the logo and make threes at a 40% clip, which is absurd to a lot of people. Um, but I do think that there's a lot of skill and merit that goes into that as well. And I just think we're in an era of the NBA where not only is it more important to shoot threes more than ever, but also the efficiency with that as well. We see guys like Trey Young who are starting to continue on with that 3 point merit as well, and a notable other people as well. So I don't know. I think it might not look as great on TV, but I still think there's still a lot of skill there. And I do think the NBA is going to evolve eventually back to the big man, just like what we've seen with the running back in football. I think we'll see the same thing again eventually when the Steph Curry era is over. But the NBA is, continuously evolving. So it's just I think it's fascinating to see how much it's changed over time.
Yeah, and I think the interesting part is we are seeing it chip back to that big man because we had like Carl Anthony Towns kind of start the trend that was laid by Dirk Nowitzki and Kevin Durant by like being a 3-point shooting big man. And then we had Joel Embiid come into the league. We had uh, Jokic come into the league, and now we have Victor Wembanyama. Where now, if you're a big man, being a 3-point shooter is kind of a requirement for you. So now we have every single player playing every aspect of the game, where it's a lot more complicated to manage players' skill set. If you're a head coach right now, if everyone can dribble and pass, it's not just as simple as we need a point guard. Now we kind of need to fill in all of the positions where maybe we don't need like a strict scoring point guard or a scoring playmaker at point guard. Where if you're Denver, like maybe we have to build our team differently if we're Denver or San Antonio versus if you have Anthony Edwards as your best player.
Yeah, absolutely. I think nowadays, if you're going to have somebody like an Anthony Edwards or, um, in the past like Jimmy Butler, you're still going to need your big men that are going to be able to drive in the paint, get those rebounds. I think when the Warriors were most successful is when they had a big man that could complement Steph and Clay, and then ultimately, Kevin Durant and Draymond, a guy that can pick up those rebounds, redistribute the ball. It's just we've entered into an era of positionless basketball, which I think has made it more challenging to be great in the NBA than ever before. And those that are great are the guys that are reaping the benefits of it. Those are the Steph Currys of the world. LeBron, the way he's been able to evolve his career over the last 20 years, those guys are the ones that are basically the pillars of that success, the way they've been able to evolve their game.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like an equalizer to the super team in the NBA, where if you can make a bunch of threes and outshoot a team, maybe you don't necessarily need the best team, you just need the best constructed team in the NBA now, where there hasn't really been a consistent dominant franchise since Golden State right now. So since Golden State they won back to back championships. They didn't even three-peats. Like, when was the last three-peat in the NBA? Like, was
To
it
the Lakers.
the Lakers? Yeah, so it was in the 2000s, and then LeBron technically, uh,
He
he
never
didn't have a
three-peated either.
three-peat in his career, no, because the
The Heat lost with the Mavericks and Spurs. It was like lost, two championships lost, and then ultimately he went to Cleveland. So they didn't have a dynasty either. The Warriors were close. They won their first title, then they lost the 2016, won the next two, and then went to the Raptors and lost because the whole team fell apart basically. But even since the Warriors dynasty, we haven't seen a team win multiple championships in a short span. We've seen teams like the Nuggets win. We've seen the Celtics win. We've seen the Bucks win. We've seen all these teams win, but we haven't seen a team win multiple championships since the Warriors. Ultimately, it's been all new championships. Ultimately,
Yeah, and it's like everyone like thinks the Warriors and the Lakers era is kind of dead, but we're still waiting for like a team in this era to really step up and kind of just take it, which I feel like is why like the media discussion has got so bland around the NBA, where sometimes you do need structure with super teams in the NBA, where you have two teams that you can hone in on and talk about, where they don't have interesting conversations where you look back at certain things historically in the NBA. It's just like week 16 into the NBA regular season of who the face of the NBA is, when no team has won multiple championships over the past decade outside of the Warriors and LeBron James.
yeah, no, I think it is interesting. However, I do think that we're entering a new era of the NBA with what we're currently seeing in the standings. Like we have the little bit of the end with LeBron and Steph. They're both playing really great since the trade deadline. The Lakers have won seven straight. They're the two seed. The Warriors have leaped out of the play-in tournament, and they've been playing excellent since they've come. So they're still alive. The teams like the Celtics, who have been brilliantly constructed by Brad Stevens, and then honestly, even the Knicks, they've made some great moves over the last few years to make their team really good. The Cavaliers and how they've built their team over the last 3 to 4 years with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, and a number of other those guys. But nobody's there to. No, they still need someone out there to take it as well. The Mavericks, they were good with Luca. They obviously have disseminated a little bit since then, but um, we're still waiting for someone to take the crown.
Yeah, we're waiting for like two franchises, because usually you have multiple of them going at the same time. Like before, you had like the Lakers and the Spurs going at the same time in the same conference, competing with each other, kind of trading championships. So we'll see if someone can take it this season and finally win multiple championships. But, the Mavericks were in a situation where they could win a championship. They trade for Anthony Davis here, and then they play a total of one game together with Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis, because Anthony Davis only plays one game, Anthony day to day. Everyone knows how he plays. He doesn't. And then Kyrie Irving is also someone who's had injury issues over the past few years. And now Nico Harrison was like, we want to align someone with Kyrie's timetable. But Kyrie is someone who has had injury issues and knee injuries in the past, and he is a little bit of a flakier player who may retire early. Same with Anthony Davis, at least injury wise, not necessarily being flaky and retiring early, but he could just because of getting sick of rehab. But now Kyrie Irving is out, and we could potentially see Dallas in the play-in tournament.
Yeah, if we could see the Mavericks potentially fall out of it. We could see potentially the Suns, who are terrible, make it, or the Trailblazers, who have no business making the play-in tournament, in there as well. And the Mavericks are completely in disarray since then. I think they've lost 7 of the last 10 games last time I checked. Just completely falling apart. We have Kyrie Irving, who's out for the season with the ACL tear. Who knows what's going to happen with Anthony Davis? And then ultimately, you really want to see in the play-in tournament Daniel Gafford and old Clay Thompson, Dante Exum. I don't want to see that. I do want to see the Clippers. The Clippers are fun with James Harden. Every other team in the play-in I don't have a beef with, but whoever that 10th spot is, I don't want to see the Mavericks. I don't want to see the Suns, and I don't want to see the Trailblazers. The only team that I would have had any interest in ultimately was the Spurs, but Wemby's out for the season, and I just think they're too far away to catch up. That's the team that would have been at least somewhat interesting, but that's all gone. So the 9 and 10 spot's going to be a joke at this point. But yeah, the Maverick. I don't want to see Dante Exum in the play-in tournament as their best player.
Yeah, no, I feel like the play-in tournament in the East will be really interesting, but the West will be bad. And do you I don't know, with the play-in tournament at this point, it gets to the point like, do you like it? Like, because I feel like the play-in tournament has had good moments, but now it's at the point where like at first maybe it's really competitive, but when the league is going through a transitionary period, sometimes you're just gonna have years where it's not gonna be that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the standings right now. Um, all three of the play-in tournament teams, all four of the play-in tournament teams in the East, have a losing record. The Bulls are 24 and 38. They could end up winning 30 games and somehow make the playoffs. That's disgraceful. And then on the other end, like the West, everyone has a winning record. That's fine. But we could see the Mavericks slip out. We might see the Suns in there. Nobody wants to see the Suns. They aren't good at literally anything at this point. Please let that super team die. So it's like, I think it's a year to year scenario in the NBA, but the East specifically, the problem with the East is that there's like four good teams in the East, and the rest are like either fine or not very good. And I look at the entire teams in the Eastern Conference play-in tournament right now. The Heat without Jimmy Butler, we're gonna have the Anthony Wiggins Miami Heat. I'm good. I don't need that. The Magic, they're fine. I don't care too much. The Hawks are fun, I guess. But then the biggest one, I'll shout them out again because why are they in the play-in tournament? It seems like they're always the 10th seed. The Bulls. The Bulls. They are 24 and 38. They're going to win like 30 games and they're going to somehow be in contention for the playoffs. That's
Bro,
disgraceful.
this is why the lottery is stupid. Like, there's certain things the NBA does well, but there's certain things that they do really bad, which is kind of why their league suffers. Like, maybe sometimes the worst team should get the best player. Maybe sometimes, like, that's the only way they're going to get better because chances are he's going to be on a bad team with other bad players and you can lose again, get another good player so we can actually have some clarity so we don't have these random franchises like the San Antonio Spurs getting Victor Wembanyama when the Detroit Pistons have just been sitting here suffering for years. But no, the NBA is like, we need to do a lottery system to discourage tanking. Like, guess what? People still tank and then they get screwed for tanking. I remember when tanking was a huge like talking point for boomers in sports media like 8 years ago. There's like, oh, the lottery stops teams from tanking. Like, it doesn't. Like, it doesn't help anything at all, and then it just makes you have teams like the Bulls in the play-in tournament every single year. The Pistons never been good at all. Maybe sometimes you just need to give some of these bad teams a bone. Like, hey, Victor Wembanyama, generational player. Do not fuck this up. It's impossible to. And one of those times, you'll be right, and you might just turn your team around, and then it could actually help your league be good. Where instead of sacrificing 10 seasons of tanking, you only have to sacrifice one, two, maybe three if you do it right.
Yeah. And it's not a guarantee, especially with the current NBA draft at this point. I was watching a game recently and like everybody else, I didn't pay for it. We went on, I'm not going to name it because I like to keep it intact, but it accidentally had the Wizards broadcast of this game. I think it was Wizards Suns or Wizards Lakers. Either way, it was the Wizards broadcast of this game, and they were losing by like 30 points. And they were hyping up Bud Carrington because he had scored a 20-point game against the Hawks recently. Like franchises like the Wizards, franchises like the Pelicans, like the Jazz currently in the tanking mode, the Hornets, like these teams need something, especially a team like the Wizards. Think about the rest of Washington. They are surrounded by politicians and monuments from fucking 1776. That's all they have. At one point, the Wizards were known for Michael Jordan owning them, or being a part of their team. That's not fair. The Wizards, I don't think they have great history, but like when you think about the Wizards' history, you think about Gilbert Arenas and how he got shot in the foot,
By
genuinely. And the
himself.
Wizards organization every single year gets shot in the foot because they're always the worst team, and yet they never get the first overall pick. I'm not even a Wizards fan. In fact, I could care less about Washington D.C. But that's an example of a team. I watch their you want to empathize with a franchise. Watch their team friendly broadcast because the teams with those scenarios that we're talking about have the most saddest broadcasts ever. The fact that they're hyping up Bud Carrington for the Wizards is sad. And they can go on for the Hornets, they can go on for the Raptors, everybody that's not in the play-in tournament right now. Give these guys somebody. Where is LeBron in this next draft? Where is Steph Curry? Where is Kevin Durant? Give these guys something to be excited for. Please, for the NBA, have a heart, is what I'll say to them. They need a heart.
Yeah, literally. The lottery doesn't make sense, so like it goes off on a tangent like what thinking about like if the playing tournament makes sense, but like looping back to it, like the first year of the playing tournament, like we got Warriors and Grizzlies, we had Steph Curry versus LeBron James, we had Jimmy Butler versus the Hawks. Like we had some entertaining play-in tournament games. We had Cody White turning into Michael Jordan for the Bulls at one point last year. Like I feel like we've gotten some good games out the play-in tournament, but like this year it's like just does not look good. Just looks like an emergency waiting to happen. And then people like have the same complaint with the NFL adding the 7th seed, but I feel like that 7 like I feel like that makes sense for the NFL. Like 7 teams from each conference like makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I think it's totally fine to cut the fat. I think it's fun. Like the play-in tournament can be fun, but in a scenario like this year, like this is when the NBA should probably reinvent the wheel a little bit. Maybe instead of it being 10 teams, maybe it's 8 teams, and those 8 teams can battle for seeding at the end of the season. Maybe that's the solution. I'm not sure. But the way it is now, like the Bulls, they're going to be bounced. It's not going to be a good product. The Hawks, we'll see what they do, but it's just not a good product right now, ultimately, when it comes to the NBA.
Yeah, I think the playoffs are good though. So we'll see when it comes to the NBA. But we had some news in the NFL. Debo Samuel got traded for a 5th round pick. Disrespectful to Debo Samuel. I mean, just giving him away. Is this Julio Jones got traded for a 2nd round pick, and then so did uh, what was that other player who's traded at the same time the Patriots traded for Julio Jones
Mohamed
for a
Sanu.
second. Yeah, Mohamed Sanu. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what's insane about all this? So Debo Samuel gets traded for a bag of chips, ultimately. A fifth round player who might never play um, for them at all. They trade him for a fifth. The 49ers are paying 99% of that contract. You want to know the cap hit for the Commanders? They're going to pay him $5 million to be their number two. They're
For
paying him
how
$5
long?
million. And the Commanders have a million, like they have, I think, the third most cap space in the NFL at this point. The 49ers are paying him $31 million this year to not play for their team, while the Commanders are going to reap all of the reward of Debo Samuel for a measly 5th round pick. This is a home run trade for the Commanders and a laughable trade for the 49ers. I understand the move for the 49ers in the sense that they should probably rebuild. Brandon Ayuk, I understand they're going to probably move on from him as well. But Commanders, quite honestly, fleeced this team. I think they hit a home run. You pair him with Terry McLaurin, they're still not done potentially. Maybe they go out and get another guy. I love this trade for the Commanders, though.
Yeah, and I like this trade for them a lot, specifically because what they gave up for him, it's like people will be like, "Oh, well, you traded for an old Debo Samuel who's kind of starting to be washed." And my deal is like, so what when you're in a situation where you're just trying to get the best players possible around your quarterback? Like giving up a fifth round pick is not that much, and the fact that you only have to pay him $5 million, so you're gonna have so much other cap space left to go out there and get someone like potentially DK Metcalf who could be available, or another wide receiver like Tyreek Hill if he inevitably gets traded. Like you still have the cap space to do that because you're only paying him 5 million, and then he's also a Swiss Army knife. Where he's a player who you can use at running back. You can use him at wide receiver for the Commanders. So I feel like this is going to be a great fit for Washington just because you've got a guy who there's no pressure for him to be your number one receiver. You're just looking for him to be your number four or number three weapon on your team. And then you have room to go out there and draft a running back and go out and push for another big name receiver to go along with McLaurin and Debo Samuel. Then we can focus on the offensive line and defense. Like, this is a great fit for the Washington Commanders with all of the room that they still have to grow around him.
Yeah, and I think they still have money that if they want to go out and sign a running back, they want to draft someone like a Cam Scatabo potentially. That's an option for him. And then defensively, there's so many great defensive players in free agency, and they have, I believe, I think $80 million in cap space to go, even after this Debo Samuel trade. He's a guy that, even if he's Panthers Adam Thielen at this point, who by no means was washed, but maybe not the same player, we just need to see like 70% of Debo Samuel, and that's a home run trade for them because, like you mentioned, with all the things that he can do, running the football, being a good screen player, like I think that the way that Cliff Kingsbury was conducting plays last year, Debo Samuel fits into the system perfectly. You can still, even if you want to bolster your receivers, even with someone like a Chris Godwin, that's still somebody that's going to complement your game. The Commanders have more room to grow. They can focus on their offensive line. They can go out and get their defense that they need, but he immediately makes their offense better, and it was already one of the best offenses in football last year. So it's a great pick for them.
Yeah, and it's a situation where the NFC East is a division where you rarely have a repeat winner, so we kind of need a monumental shift in a season for a Super Bowl champion team to be dethroned, where you have the Eagles who potentially could move on from AJ Brown to save some money cap wise, and there's kind of been a rift there for 2 years, and could go out there, get a replacement receiver in the draft, maybe punt on the season and go all in for a Super Bowl in a year later. And then you have the Commanders who now just got Debo Samuel as their first move of the offseason for a fifth round pick, and they're only paying him $5 million. Like, that's the start to a monumental shift that has to happen for a trend to continue in this division and a cycle to keep repeating in the NFL, like it has over the past 2 decades in the NFC East.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also when you think about like Super Bowl hangovers, not that I think the Eagles are going to have a severe Super Bowl hangover, but there's a lot of mouths that need to be fed. Both they just signed Saquon Barkley to an extension. They just signed Zach Braun to an extension. They had to cut Darius Slay and a number of other players. So I think that while I don't think the Eagles take a step back, I also think that Super Bowl hangovers are a real thing. So if they come out sluggish, if they start to struggle, the Commanders there with Debo Samuel, with another year with Jaden Daniels, and then all the talent that they end up acquiring, I think they can easily win that division at this point, especially with the Cowboys and Giants in disarray.
Then we're going to be back to fire Nick Sirianni.
Yeah, yeah, Nick Sirianni will be fired next. But it's interesting. Commanders get Debo Samuel, and then there's been a bunch of news wide receiver wise. For example, the Seahawks cut pretty much a quarter of their wide receiver core. They cut Tyler Lockett, longtime Seahawks legend. He's gone. We'll see where he goes if he ends up continuing to play. And then DK Metcalf requests a trade out of Seattle, which I think is not surprising to me, but he's looking to go to a contender. There's a number of teams that are definitely going to be interested in his services, but GK potentially out of Seattle and Tyler Lockett officially out of Seattle.
Yeah, no, Tyler Lockett officially out of Seattle, and that's one of those players who's been there for a while. So that's like a veteran player on your team where he's kind of just been one of those kind of like Julian Edelman type players for the Seattle Seahawks, and he's been a fan favorite there. So it's just one of those lesser known players that's tough to see go. But DK Metcalf asking, officially requesting a trade is definitely interesting, and it's going to reset the entire wide receiver market where this is the equivalent of someone like AJ Brown or Tyreek Hill asking for a trade. The question is really going to be where he's going to go and who's going to want him, because the thing with DK Metcalf is he's not an old receiver, but he is an older receiver, and he's someone who's had issues with being consistent. So you have to decide, can I get the most out of DK Metcalf and figure out how to pave over those inconsistencies that he's had and showing up and performing in big games? And can he stay healthy? Is it going to be worth paying him the money? And then, is my goal a Super Bowl, or is my goal just to have an entertaining football team where we have a lot of big plays and DK Metcalf plays 10 games and then is injured and then has about six really big games for you? So it's kind of going to have all of those factors for it, where it's like, how much do teams really believe in DK Metcalf being a solidified number one consistently on the field, and then being able to sustain an injury rise where you can count on him to be with you for an entire Super Bowl run. So it'll be interesting to see the market for him.
I have an early suspicion that I think that a team like the Chargers, who want to complement Lad McConkey's game, I think that for them, if they can give up similar to what the Commanders gave up for Debo Samuel, they can get him for like a fourth or a fifth round pick. I think the Chargers are going to be the ones that are going to be the most aggressively pursuing him because ultimately they have a lot of cap space. They just cut Joey Bosa. That just saved them some money. And then if they can go out and get DK, their receiver core looks a little bit better. They've always been good with drafting receivers. And I think that he's going to want to stay on the West Coast. I think he likes living in Seattle. I think he'll like living in LA a little more. So the Chargers make a lot of sense. I also think that if they want to move on from Cooper Kupp, the Rams are always in the mix for a receiver, whether it be him or Devontae. But early on, my early suspicions, I think it's going to be the Chargers.
Yeah, Chargers would be an interesting one. I think a dark horse would be the Patriots in this situation, where Mike Vrabel just has to say, "Look, man, we have the cap space. We know he wants to leave, and he's a solidified receiver that is 6'4". He has wheels. Like, we know he's a bona fide number one receiver, at least in our mind here, and we have the money to pay him. We don't have to pay Drake May. Then we can also go out there and try and get a guy like Chris Godwin as well. Then we have good tight ends. We're gonna have a really good running game as well. Like, I think we can actually win if we just go out there and pay a receiver. Like, I think he can convince Robert Kraft of that. So I think at least salary cap wise, asset wise, the New England Patriots should be the number one contender to go out there and get DK Metcalf. It's like, there's no excuse not to at this point. You need a receiver and you can't draft one. Like, Mike Vrabel was still the guy who was a part of the plan to move on from AJ Brown and draft Jalen Burks. Now, if that was more the GM than Mike Vrabel, we'll never know. But I do think New England has to be towards the top of the list as a contender for DK Metcalf.
I would hope so. I mean, look at all the times that it succeeded in the past, right? The Eagles, another team that's notoriously bad at drafting receivers, they gave up trying to draft him after what happened with Jalen Rieger. So they traded for AJ Brown. It's been very successful since then, obviously hoisting the Lombardi. And then the last time that they really traded for a top wide receiver was 2007 when they traded for Randy Moss, and they had the greatest 3 year run of any quarterback wide receiver duo of all time. So the Patriots need to. I mean, who's their number one? Can anybody name their number one receiver? Can anybody name any of their receivers? Never mind their number one. You get DK, you can afford to overpay him. You have the most cap space by like $30 million. Go out and give him $40 million a year if you have to. Even though I don't think he's worth $40 million, go out and pay him. Convince him to stay in that frigid New England weather, and he's going to get fed. I mean, he's been splitting targets with Jackson Smith, Najigba, and Tyler Lockett these last couple of years. There's nobody on the Patriots that are going to steal targets from DK Metcalf. This man's going to get fed like nobody I've ever seen before. Maybe not since anybody who played for Matt Stafford, whether it be Kelvin Johnson or Cooper Kupp. Like, This man is going to get 175 targets. He could have potentially a 1,600-yard season with the Patriots if he plays for them. They just have to
Yeah.
convince him to sign there.
Yeah, no, MVP Drake May candidate potentially, or DK Metcalf for saving the Patriots. But I have article pulled up from Fox Sports, and it is the top 5 locations for DK Metcalf. So I want to go through this just so we have a sentiment for our fans and people listening on where not where we think DK Metcalf should go, but where the sports media is kind of leading right now. Then at number 5 is the Dallas Cowboys because of former offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer. So that'd be nice to reunite with each other. But
That
the
would
only
be,
problem is you have to pay Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons.
yeah. I did see they restructured Dak's contract, but ultimately they're one of the teams with one of the worst cap situations in the NFL. So that'd be fun for the headlines, but I don't think that's realistic at all.
But do you think Dak Prescott saying that we're pretty close to the Philadelphia Eagles and they won a Super Bowl, so really we're not that far off? Like, do you think that changes anyone's mind when they're like, maybe he's right, maybe the Cowboys aren't that far off?
I think they're about as close to the Eagles as they are geographically close to the city of Philadelphia from Dallas.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's close. DK would make it more exciting, but it's not going to bring them over the hump, even against the Commanders either.
Yeah, and then at number 4, we have the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel needs to add offensive talent for second-year quarterback Drake May. Patriots have the most salary cap space in the NFL, so they have the money to do a deal with Metcalf. New England had trouble creating chunk plays last season, finishing with just 34 20-plus pass yard plays, tied for the fewest in the league. Adding Metcalf would help May and the Patriots take the top off opposing defenses. That sounds like assault in some contexts.
Yes. Yeah, we agree with the Patriots. If they can convince him, just like in the past with anybody going to New England, Randy Moss, or hell, even Kevin Garnett in the NBA, like if they can get him, that's great. They can pay him a bunch of money, and he'll easily be the number one. He just wants to go to a contender, and the Patriots are far from being contenders.
Yeah, and what I'll say too is like for this list at number 3, we have the Green Bay Packers. Like, if you're DK Metcalf, like Green Bay is the team you should want to go to out of any other team. Like Jordan Love is going to be the gunslinger quarterback who can put the ball where only you can get it. You think of Dak Prescott, like not it. Justin Herbert, like you really want to play with Justin Herbert? Like, no, you want to play with someone. If you're a wide receiver, like Jordan Love is the wide receivers quarterback, where it's like maybe he'll have some turnovers, but it's not for lack of trying to fitting it into a window that only you can get the ball and come out of it, or forcing it into triple coverage. Like, you want to see a dynamic duo and a team that would absolutely take it to the next level under Matt LaFleur. Like, if you add a talent like DK Metcalf under Matt LaFleur with Jordan Love, like Jordan Love might
That'd
be
be
a
a fun
better
team.
passer overall than Russell Wilson. Like this is going to be the best quarterback that he's played with, and it may take the Packers from a level. It's like, yeah, the Bears are here, yeah, the Lions are here. That run was nice, but now we're kind of officially back at the top of the NFC North, and we're here to stay.
Yeah, I think the Packers would be really fascinating. The problem I've had with the Packers in the Jordan Love era is they have a lot of really nice receivers, but these are all guys that would be better as a 2 or 3. Romeo Dobbs is fine. Dontavian Wicks is a fine receiver. You get DK there, he's the guy easily. And I think that him and Jordan Love's game would complement very well. And then you also pair Josh Jacobs into the mix there. That offense should be a top 5 offense at that point,
It should be, and you should be a Super Bowl contender as well.
for sure. Guaranteed.
And then at number 2, it's too painful to even say, but they have Las Vegas here for some reason. I don't know why.
Vegas? Why the fuck would he
Vegas.
want to go to Vegas? Because of Pete Carroll? No. No, dude. I don't care what your relationship is. Who's their quarterback? They just cut Gardner Minshew. We don't know who they're going to get at quarterback. I think they have a better chance of getting Sam Darnold than any of the quarterbacks that are in this draft. No. This is ridiculous. Just because Pete Carroll's there does not mean he's going to the Raiders. that's preposterous. There's a Raiders influencer making this article.
Yeah, no, definitely a Raiders influencer. Like, I could honestly see why he would want to go to Vegas because if he doesn't care about winning, he just wants the most amount of money possible and to live in the desert. Sure, maybe I want to go to Vegas there. If I don't care about like winning on the football field, but if I care about winning, I want to go to Green Bay, even though like living in Green Bay versus Vegas, I don't know. And then
Yeah, that
living
sounds
in
bad.
New England versus Green Bay, like it's debatable. And then like the number one option, like LA, like you know, Green Bay is harsh in the winter, and he's a West Coast person. Like LA gets a bad rap, but like I feel like people will be like LA's terrible and it's bad. Like LA is 100 cities in a city. Like people with money don't experience the same thing you do.
Yeah, and played in Seattle for these last few years. He went to college at Mississippi, so he hasn't been in like cold weather. He's also from Mississippi as well, so he's from the South. He's not used to cold. He would go to New England or Green Bay, and he would be in shambles. I, for myself, was born in New England, and I was in shambles every winter with how cold it was. DK Metcalf, maybe he's the same blood as I am. So for me, like he goes to a team like Green Bay or New England, that first winter is going to be harsh. And especially if you're losing, if you're a team like the Patriots and maybe you're like 2-7, like he's going to be pissed that he signed with the Patriots for all that money. In Green Bay, I don't think it's going to be nearly as bad for Green Bay. I think he can put up with winning in that case, but yeah, for a guy that's used to the warm weather, I think a warm weather climate's going to be a lot better. And LA has like some of the best weather in all of America, at least just California as a whole, even if it smells bad there.
Yeah, it may, you may get your homeowner's insurance canceled on you and it'll mysteriously burn down a couple months later. But other than that, it's great, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I think LA makes sense. The Rams, I don't think are going to go for DK Metcalf. I don't think the Seahawks would trade him to the Rams, but I do think the Chargers make the most sense, just for everything I mentioned.
I mean, no, the most sense is the team that makes the most sense is Kansas City, obviously.
No, they're not going to make that move. That'd be,
We need
I think
more
the Seahawks.
offense. We got blitzed in the Super Bowl. Maybe we can't do it with these receivers. We need to go back to the explosive offense, take more pressure off Travis Kelsey. He's not as explosive as he was the first few Super Bowls. It's time for another weapon like Tyreek Hill. Oh, DK Metcalf, you're 6'4", and we need to move on from Travis in the next few years. Great. Like that's the team that makes the most sense. Like you want to see like Patrick Mahomes throw for 50 touchdowns instead of playing eye gouging football.
Yeah, but what about Buffalo though? Buffalo could use him.
They had their chance. You wasted Stephon Diggs' career there. Like you didn't do anything with Stephon Diggs. Like nah. Like sorry, you had your turn with the star receiver.
What about a team like? I mean, the Commanders could still go out there and get DK. Technically, they could just make the most elite receiver core
I think
trading
they
for him.
can. And like I feel like they weren't on this list, but they should still be a team that's in the cards because if you're DK Metcalf, like I feel like Washington should have been on there instead of Las Vegas. Vegas is there because of cap space and Pete Carroll, but like if you're DK Metcalf, do you really want to go back to Pete Carroll, who's probably only going to be there for like 2 years and then is going to move into the front office? He's just going to like establish a culture and a coaching staff and then hand pick the guys, and you're going to have like a weird president Pete Carroll, minority owner Tom Brady, worst haircut NFL owner in the NFL, and then Chip Kelly as head coach. Like it's not a great situation in Las Vegas.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to go there. At least every other place that we mentioned has some sort of a quarterback. We're not gonna have a quarterback with the Raiders there. Even if they draft the quarterback, given their record with first round picks, i.e. the Henry Ruggs of the world, i.e. the Tyree Wilsons of the world, chances are that's not going to be very successful.
Yeah, but if you do get Shador and then you can get DK Metcalf as well, then it makes sense, but
That could be fun.
only if.
Yeah, but DK, that's a huge moving block. I feel like for the receiver core, between him between we mentioned Debo and then also some other news as well. Devonte Adams was cut from the Jets in one of the worst iterations of the Jets that we've seen to this point. The most disappointing. Devontae ends up playing, I think, 9 games for them, and they go 2-7 with him there. Still very much a competent receiver. He ends up with he plays 11 games. They go 2-9. Not very impressive, but he still has a lot in the tank. He's a little bit older, but now someone can just sign him ultimately to whatever deal he requires.
Yeah, someone can just sign him to any deal, and I feel like someone will pick him up, especially a team who's going to be a contender. Probably going to go to a team with a veteran quarterback, and it's probably form. I feel like Tampa would be a really good team for him. If not Tampa Bay, I could definitely see him going to the Rams if Matt Stafford comes here, or whatever team Aaron Rodgers is on. Because when Aaron Rodgers goes to Minnesota, if we can have Devontae, Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, Justin Jefferson, and TJ Hawkinson, like feel like that's a pretty good roster. Maybe he goes back to Green Bay, plays with Jordan Love.
Yeah, you know what? I'll give him some advice though. Don't follow Aaron Rodgers and don't follow Derek Carr because I swear to God, like Aaron Rodgers has created, he's I don't think he's made him necessarily. He worked hard to be as good as he is, but I think also this was an opportunity. Like, if somebody doesn't watch football, you would think that Aaron Rodgers essentially sabotaged his career. He ends up going through the whole "I'm going to retire, I'm not going to retire" fiasco. He's like, you know what? I'm fed up with this. Trade me to my best friend Derek Carr's Oakland Raiders, Vegas Raiders. He goes to the Raiders, and then they move on from him almost immediately after. He plays 1 year there. They get rid of Derek Carr, and then they're relying on the Gardner Minshew's of the world, the Aiden O'Connell's of the world, and then he's like, you know what? Fuck the Raiders. Let me redeem myself with Aaron Rodgers, and they have one of the most pathetic Jets seasons in recent memory, which is honestly impressive because of how pathetic the Jets have been historically every season. So if I'm him, maybe just break up with Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr. Don't go to the Saints. Don't go to wherever Aaron Rodgers goes. I think he ultimately goes to the Rams because he's from California. He wanted to be close to it. That's part of the reason why he was interested in the Raiders. And I don't see him in a Chargers uniform either. So that leaves me with the Rams. You got a veteran quarterback with Matt Stafford. You have a team that can contend right away. He doesn't need to be the number one. You have Puka Nakoa there. You're moving on from Cooper Kupp. You bring in Devontae, who might have a little bit more in the tank. So I think Devontae makes the most sense with the Rams ultimately.
Yeah, he makes sense with the Rams. Honestly, uniform wise, the team he makes the most sense with would be the Falcons. And I feel like him, Michael Penix, Drake London, like it would make it a complete wide receiver room with that team. And then you have, you know, Kyle Pitts is still there. He's around. He's doing
Somewhere.
things on that team. You need a
Not
new
much.
tight end still, but I feel like Devontae Adams on the Falcons could be a good sleeper team if he's going to go to a team with a young quarterback, and they still have some cap space where they could probably make it work with him. But do you think he's going to try and chase a ring, or he's just out? He's trying to make the most money possible.
I think he's going to try to find a mix of both. If I'm him, I want to find the best situation where I can compete because you have the accolades. You're probably still a Hall of Famer. You have the statistics. He's going to have 1,000 catches in 1,200 receiving yards. So he's already a Hall of Famer. So ultimately, can he win a ring? And I think he could do that with the Rams potentially. I think if the Packers want to reunite with him potentially, he would be a fine fit there. But go somewhere where you're going to contend because then at least at that point, even if you're the one or two or maybe three receiver, at that point he's still a very good receiver. He's still a great route runner. So I think he'll be successful wherever he goes. But I'm rooting for the Rams. I think the Rams are a good fit for him. Um, I think he would complement their games well.
Yeah, no, he could definitely complement their games there. And especially because Cooper Cup may be gone as well here. So he's another receiver that could be on the move this offseason. And if you are moving up on from Cooper Cup, like why would you bring in Devontae Adams? Like it's two wide receivers I feel like they're pretty much in the same position career wise. So that's something that gives me at least cause to pause or like maybe it doesn't make sense with the Rams.
Yeah, that is true. I just feel like Cooper Cup has reached this point in his career with the Rams where they're trying to turn a new leaf. I think if Devontae ends up being with the Rams, it's not going to be for the money. It's going to be a discount that he pays for them because he thinks that they're going to win a Super Bowl with them. He just likes the idea of being in LA. It is unfortunate the Cooper Cup situation though, because ultimately he has this historic season with the Rams where he wins the Triple Crown, wins the Super Bowl, and then since then he's been banged up the last couple of seasons, and I feel like he's getting somewhat of an unfair shake, but at the same time, it seems like he is kind of transitioning to the second half of his career. So he's most likely going to be cut or traded within the next, probably by the next time we record the episodes, to be honest. Um, so where would you see Cooper Cup going ultimately in this position here?
Um, I like the idea of Cooper Cup in Cincinnati. I feel like that's a good fit for him. And then also New England bringing him in because sometimes they bring in their white receivers later in their career, like Wes Welker or Danny Amendola had been at other franchises previously. So I feel like those are two teams that could definitely benefit from Cooper Cup there. And then maybe a team like Tennessee if they're desperate because we know how Tennessee loves harvesting old wide receivers. So they're like, you know what? We had DeAndre Hopkins. He's gone right now. Um, we have, what is left of the fantasy football gambler on our team right now in Calvin Ridley. And then Traylon Burks is no good. And then we had old Julio Jones on our team. So why not add Cooper Cup to the list of old wide receivers we've had, like Randy Moss?
Yeah, I would hate that him going to Tennessee because that is the death note. Think about where Julio Jones was when he left the Falcons. There was some glimmer. They traded him for a second round pick, and then it was like, okay, Titans Julio Jones has become the Celtic Shack of the NFL. I feel like anytime you're on the Titans and you're a wide receiver and you're in the old second half of your career, it's not a good sign. So I hope he doesn't go to the Titans. Bengals are interesting. Do they have the cap space for him? I hope so. Um, Complimenting him with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase would be elite. Um, I think ultimately the Patriots make the most sense for him simply because we know what the Patriots like. We know what pigment of skin they typically like for their wide receivers to be. So Cooper Cup makes a lot of sense in New England. Can I be surprised? You gotta when you're saying Cooper Cup, say it with a Boston accent. Doesn't make sense in Boston. Cooper Cup. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Cooper
So
Cap.
yeah. So Cooper Cup, I think, is going to be a Patriot ultimately, and they can pay him a shit ton of money.
Yeah, Patriot or Titan. I could definitely see either of those coming true. Maybe he goes
Yeah.
down the road to the Chargers too. You have Vlad McConkey and Cooper Cup, but it's still kind of having the same receiver. But maybe you think it works. Like, why not? Why not have two of the same shirt?
Hey, why not? Yeah, I think he's a good fit. Um, the Bengals tagged T. Higgins as well for the second straight season. Couple of things for me. Are they going to trade T. Higgins is the real question, but also the tag. I fucking hate the fact that you can tag a player 2 consecutive seasons. In my mind, the tag should only happen once. And T. Higgins getting tagged a second time means we're going to go through the fiasco of of him not getting a long-term deal for the second straight off season. That's my grief with this tag here. But T. Higgins is supposedly going back with the Bengals. They might end up trading him ultimately, but T. Higgins, where is he going?
Yeah, his mom is upset too, with the Cincinnati Bengals. But like with the T. Higgins thing, like we have this thing every single year with the Cincinnati Bengals where they start out slow to start the year, and now we're starting out the offseason behind where we had an entire year to make a plan with T. Higgins. Are we going to pay him or are we going to trade him? But you decided you have to go the franchise tag route and then see if we can play this all the way until the regular season. And then we may have to make a trade at the last minute. And then we're going to be behind as far as the plan for our wide receiver next year. Or he's not going to play, and then we're going to have to not even get a wide receiver back for him. And then we have to punt again on another year this season. Like the Cincinnati Bengals are setting themselves up to squander not one, not two, but 3 years of Joe Burrow's prime. Then we have like what, 7 years left after that. So you may win one Super Bowl when you probably threw away the opportunity to win two if you could have had a team this year. And then you haven't had a plan with T. Higgins. Like, this is a huge problem with the Cincinnati Bengals because the problem is you have the money to pay him. So why aren't you paying him right now? And it's because your franchise is cheap. And now it's created this whole delusion around the NFL where it's like T. Higgins has been tagged twice now. The Cincinnati Bengals are behind, and now every single fan base is like, we are one T. Higgins away from winning the Super Bowl. Now, this whole cloud of like we're one T. Higgins away from winning the Super Bowl has panned out around the NFL. It's like, sure, like great receivers have gone to teams, but like the Bills are like, we're Stephon Diggs away from winning the Super Bowl. Like, it doesn't always work out like that. Sure, is he going to help a team score a lot of points? Like, yes, but is he going to guarantee you're going to win the Super Bowl? Like, absolutely not.
No, and honestly, the way he's been banged up the last couple of seasons, the more he gets tagged, the less likely I'm going to pay this guy if I'm somebody who's shelling out $100 million to pay him, or maybe 150 million potentially. So the way he's been banged up these last 2 seasons, I know that he's a great receiver, and I know he's going to be successful wherever he goes. But at the same time, is he going to be healthy the whole season? Is the question, because he's had injury issues pretty much every season of his career. Ultimately, at least the last 2 seasons. So if you're going to commit to him for 4 years, is it worth it? Is it going to be a risk? Is it going to be a gamble? Is this contract going to blow up in your face? Like, I think T. Higgins is good. I think he's proven that he can be a solid number one, but is he going to be the number one? Is he going to be a premier number one receiver? And I think there's enough questions there to doubt whether that's the case. Um, for him, like, I think there's a number of teams he could go to where he would be the quintessential number one, but ultimately there's been short periods of time that we've seen him without Jamar Chase, and he has been really great. But that's also with Joe Burrow there as well. Not everybody has Joe Burrow. In fact, pretty much everyone except for Kansas City, Buffalo, and Baltimore have a guy equivalent to him in some extent. So yeah, I think there's a lot of doubts there. But ultimately, I just want this to be resolved. I want T. Higgins to get paid, whether it's with Cincinnati or with another team.
You know, I definitely want to see him get paid, and he feels like, T. Higgins feels like he has the potential to play out what Martavius Bryant's potential really was if he maximized it with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he's a tall, long, physical, fast wide receiver who can get downfield. And I feel like he can help a lot of teams. Now, will he be a number one like a Justin Jefferson or a Tyreek Hill, or have the same impact as AJ Brown? I'm not sure yet. I think he can, but at the same time, you still have to put the team around him. But Bleacher Report has four teams that should go after him now that he's been franchise tagged again. So we may have a trade around him. So um, the first team they have just doesn't make any sense. It's the Buffalo Bills. If you're the Bengals, why would you trade with your rival? And if you're going to be competing against them potentially in the playoffs, like you're going to trade them T. Higgins to potentially gift them a Super Bowl, like I can't see that happening.
Yeah, he's not going to Buffalo. First of all, Buffalo just had the Stephon Diggs experiment fail, and the Bengals aren't going to trade him to their rival. And can they afford him? They've had a number of different salary cap restrictions. I think they have one of the lowest cap situations in all of the NFL. That's not even an option. I think the person who wrote this is just excited about the concept of T. Higgins going to Buffalo, but no.
And then at number two, they have the Jacksonville Jaguars. of all teams coming out of nowhere. So the Brian Thomas Jr. So it's like maybe you can save your team with your coach going Duval, that
Yeah.
guy who's gonna save your team, and then you're gonna have BTJ and T Higgins, and that's gonna save Trevor Lawrence's career.
Yeah, no. T. Higgins, if I'm T. Higgins, I say absolutely not with the Jaguars. They also cut Pookie Boy Christian Kirk as well. They got rid of him. They have BTJ. T. Higgins would be a nice complement to this, but um, I just don't see it working out with Jacksonville. And I also don't know what their cap space looks like there.
And then number 3 of 4 on this list, they have the New England Patriots, which definitely makes sense because they actually have the cap space. Like I feel like the Bills and the Jaguars really don't have the cap space to pay him if they even traded for him.
Who was the? You said the Patriots?
Yeah, the Patriots.
Yeah, Patriots make a lot of sense there. They can trade him. They can sign him to a max deal, and that's a deal that I feel more confident with than if they were to sign some of the other guys we mentioned. So I'm here for it. I think T. Higgins would be a great fit.
Yeah, and then the fourth team they had on this list is the Steelers. And again, I just don't think this makes sense because you're not going to trade him to a rival in your division. I don't know like who wrote this, but like they didn't consider salary cap for the first 2 teams with the Bills and the Jaguars, where it doesn't really make sense for them. And then the Steelers, like they're in your division. Like what is this writer on? Like you wrote an
Mm.
article where you mentioned the Bills, their biggest rival, the Steelers, their biggest rival in their division outside the Ravens, and then also you put in the Patriots, which is the only team that makes sense or has the cap space to do it.
I think T. Higgins would be a good fit in Pittsburgh, but again, why are you going to trade him to a division rival? I think a better fit would be like, okay, maybe the Chargers want T. Higgins. That's a good fit potentially. The Raiders, maybe they want to trade for somebody, they get him. That makes sense. Even though it's in the same conference, I don't think you're necessarily worried about those two teams. And then if you're going to bring them to the NFC, like, okay, the Packers would love to have T. Higgins. Um, we have a team like maybe the Bears want to continuously give um, Caleb Williams more weapons. They want to trade for him. There's a number of other teams that make a lot more sense and have the cap and the wherewithal to make that trade.
Yeah, so yeah, I feel like it's going to be a team that has like a lot more cap space. Like only one of these teams on this list makes sense. Like I feel like it's going to be a Bears team. The Steelers can have a lot of cap space if they cut TJ Watt, so they'd have the space to do it. But like again, it's a division rival. So I feel like a New England, LA, Denver, or Chicago. Like those are like probably one of the 4 teams it's going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I just hope he gets paid. T. Higgins, free T. Higgins. Get him a bag that he deserves. Whether it's in Cincinnati or it's elsewhere, I just want to see this man get paid before he just ends up not getting the contract he deserves.
Yeah, no, definitely free T Higgins. Like he doesn't deserve to go through this. Like just like either make up your mind if you're gonna trade him, or like you had an entire season to figure out where we kind of everyone knew that this was coming, and it feels like the Bengals still don't have a plan or don't know if they're gonna pay him or not. Like this doesn't make sense at all. Like, and I feel like we don't need this distraction or drama, especially for the Bengals who have underachieved the past 2 years. Like, do you think the Bengals? I feel like are handling this completely the wrong way for a team that has had issues with slow starts.
Yeah, I agree. I think just all the drama. This has been a drama circulating the Bengals for the last what feels like 3 years, essentially since he's been eligible for a contract extension. And it's been looming around this team forever. Now we also have Jamar Chase, who's going to have to get paid. You're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. There's no way you don't pay Jamar Chase. So having him and T. Higgins on there is like, just figure this shit out. It's not that hard. You have a top 3 quarterback in the NFL with Joe Burrow right now. You have a top receiver with Jamar Chase, and now you have T. Higgins as well. Like, just figure it out. It shouldn't be this hard. I understand that you're perpetually cheap, but this is a situation where you're going to have the greatest era of your franchise history potentially. Don't fuck this up, please.
Yeah, like also like if T Higgins leaves, like Joe Burrow made it clear that like T Higgins needs to come back in next season, and then if you don't pay Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow is gone. But like if you don't bring back T Higgins, then you're automatically putting it in the mind of Joe Burrow, like okay, I might leave, and like that's gonna be
Yeah.
his first thought of leaving the Cincinnati Bengals, and the fact that he had to say like I would hope that we bring T Higgins back and you franchise tag him, like who's to say Joe Burrow doesn't go, okay, I want to go to San Francisco next year?
Yeah. Yeah, let me look at Joe Burrow's contract because he technically could leave after not this upcoming year, but he's got 2 years left on his deal before he could potentially opt out. And I think if he ultimately holds out and says trade me, it could get ugly. But I think that it's definitely something that's not out of the realm of possibility. For a guy who I think has that same competitive spirit that Mahomes has, he might say like, you know what, fuck it, send me to the Raiders. I'll have Brady as my owner. I'll have Pete Carroll. I'll compete with Mahomes year to year each season. I think that's definitely attainable. So yeah, they got to figure this shit out. They don't want to piss off their star guy and ultimately have him bounce.
Yeah, no. And they might because like Burrow wants to win championships. So like if he's like, okay, just trade me to the 49ers. Enough. Someone needs to rule the NFC. Trade me to the Vikings up the road.
Dude, him on the Vikings would be lethal. That'd be disgusting. Him with Justin Jefferson again.
And then
Yeah,
bring
man,
Jamar
I'm here
with
for it.
me.
Oof, man. Yeah, that'd be
If
great.
Kevin O'Connell,
LSU team
Jamar
all over
Chase,
again.
Jefferson, and Joe Burrow, like, do you need a
I know what I'm
defense?
doing after this. Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm here for it. Any other cuts and signings to note in the NFL outside of? I mean, we mentioned Max Crosby got his deal as well for 3 years. I think it's 3 years, 100 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I know he's the highest paid player at his position now of all time, and this is kind of just I don't know. The Raiders are a team that could turn around very quickly, but it doesn't seem like they're gonna go anywhere. So anytime he like has a thing like, I want to win, it seems like it's sometimes players will say like, I want to win or this sucks right now, and it's in the middle of the season when you're in the middle of losing like two, three, or four, five straight games, then they go ahead and get the most money that they can possibly get. Like sometimes like the money does talk more than winning does when you just have lost a couple games in a row in the regular season and are kind of down in that moment. Same with Tyreek Hill when he's like, I want to leave Miami after that game where they missed out on the playoffs. Like, yeah, like that was like probably the lowest he felt all season. Like he did kind of feel like he was drifting out there. And then after this season, like actually, like Miami's a pretty nice city to live in. They can give me a lot of money here. Like actually, I don't mind Miami. It's not so bad.
Yeah,
And Max Crosby, I don't mind Vegas. Like he doesn't want to move.
you know what they say, money talks. Tyreek Hill, another guy in that scenario. The thing that's disappointing about this signing, though, for me, is I really wish that Max Crosby could have left Vegas just with the current state of the Raiders. I would have loved to see him go on a team like Detroit and bolster up that defensive line. But I know he's a loyal guy. He's been loyal to the Raiders since they drafted him. So it's good to see that he's not leaving, but I am selfishly, as a fan, wishing he had gone to a better team like Detroit. Maybe he's an asshole and goes to Philadelphia. Like, there's just certain situations that I think he would have been more successful in, but loyalty, money, they all kind of work together.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, okay, it's like kind of nice he's going back to the Rays, but at the same time, you're gonna be like a Larry Fitzgerald and never win a championship.
Yeah, pretty much. Only other cut to talk about is Joey Bosa. He gets cut by the Chargers. They free up $27 million. Joey Bosa is a guy that I think is a really good edge rusher. I think he'll be complemented well with another guy. I see Joey Bosa for me when I think about destinations. He's a little bit older. He's had injuries. I see a team like potentially Detroit, a guy that might have missed out on Max Crosby. They go out and maybe get Joey Bosa to bolster up that edge line. Um, I don't know if I would do that if I'm Detroit, but I feel like that's the team that's going to be most interested in his services.
Yeah, no, there's one team that makes sense for Joey Bosa, and it's one team that could save a lot of money if they cut Von Miller. And the culture of Buffalo and Joey Bosa is a match made in heaven. I mean, the relationship he would have with the fans in that community, and then you save money cutting Von Miller, end up saving it by like signing Joey Bosa. No brainer to have him as part of Bill's Mafia. I feel like that's like a perfect culture fit. It's like Richie Incognito in Buffalo. Like it's just a match made in heaven.
Yeah, I would like him a lot in Buffalo. I also see he's from Miami. And you want to talk about Miami as a place for him? I think the defense has always been really bad in Miami. Um, but I feel like he fits the culture there a little bit. So Miami would be a good fit there. Um,
Would he play with his
so
brother and go to
yeah,
the
go to San
Chargers?
Fran. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he could go to San Francisco potentially. Be the other Bosa brother, but interested to see where he goes. I'm not upset for this for the Chargers though. They free up cap space. They can now direct their attentions there in the draft to replace him, or better yet, they can take that money and go out and sign someone like a DK Metcalf if they trade for him, a Devontae, or better yet, um, bolster up their defense in one way or another with the savings they have there.
Yeah, their defense got less racist today, so good for the Chargers.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that's the NFL. We talked about the latest and greatest in the NFL. We talked about the Steph Curry effect. Continuing on with our segment in the offseason here, the content of the week here. What have we been watching? What have we been listening to? I'll have you go first if you'd like. What have we been watching as we conclude the show?
This week I've been rewatching Squid Game. So I watched the second season when it first came out a couple months ago. Now I'm rewatching the first season, kind of seeing how it holds up and compares to like the show and how I remember it. And it's been good. And like Squid Game, like I like season two a lot. The side characters definitely aren't as interesting, but I feel like following up a show that was such a huge cultural moment, like the second season I actually enjoyed a lot, and we watched it straight through, so I thought it was really entertaining. The aesthetic and the music of the show is super like satisfying. We're just about to watch the episode where they do like the leapfrog on the
Oh yeah.
glass that's like fibered. So yeah, Squid Game's been a great time though. I like that franchise a lot, and I feel like it kind of came and went, but like going back at it, it does, and watching it, it does hold up. And not a lot of people, I feel like, had any buzz about the second season, but I thought it was solid for following up on a show that was that big. And I feel like it's hard to make a second season for a show like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I actually forgot that they had released that second season for a while. I know they're going to come out with season 3 at some point this year as well.
Then it's
So
over.
they're kind of going in like the Avatar approach, where they're going to release some. They're going to have that long pause in between season 1 and 2, and then they're going to start to streamline. And I think they're planning to end the season in 2025, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but you like season 2. I think season 3 comes out in April, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but great franchise. Season 1 was exciting to watch.
Yeah, no, season one was really good, and I felt like it was a huge cultural moment. Like the aesthetic of the show is good. Like I like the theme song a lot, and it just does a really good job of building tension. And I feel like part of the magic is watching the dubbed English version of it, where it's like clearly just off. But like part of the magic of Squid Game is just like how off the English subtitles are, and it kind of creates a magic around the show. Like the big guy in the show is like bullying everyone. Is like, oh, I bully you. It's like clearly not Asian. It sounds like a bunch of white people pretending to be Korean.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Uh, that's what I like about like, especially with like foreign shows or foreign movies, is just how bad the subtitles can be. It's pretty incredible.
The
Um,
dubbing.
what I've been
Yeah.
watching. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I a movie that I've boycotted for a long time because I didn't particularly like this franchise because I'm not really into superhero movies. I finally watched Infinity War after a long time of not watching it. And I gotta say, it actually was great to watch. Not because I think it was an excellent movie, but because my biggest gripe with superhero movies historically is it's so predictable what's going to happen. The good guy's going to win. And in real life, The good guy does not always win. Evil is among us, and I like seeing the bad guys win. That's why when it comes to like Star Wars, for example, Revenge of the Sith is the best one because the evil empire wins, and you end it. You're like, fuck, that's not what was supposed to happen. It was unpredictable. In this movie, even though I knew it was going to happen because it's been a decade and it's easily been spoiled for me, this was like actually exciting. Thanos is actually a great villain. He is somebody that I actually rooted for. And when I watched the follow up to this movie and he ends up losing, I was actually pissed. I'm like, no, let the villains win, please. Thanos was a great um, villain for this franchise. And I think also just the way that they had all of these different characters implemented into the movie, they did a relatively good job. But my biggest takeaway from it is like, can we just have a movie where the villains win more often? Because it just makes for me it makes it more exciting. And it's just for this movie specifically, the fact that it ended with him getting all the stones and killing half the population. I love that. Let's get more of that. He should have done this. If I was Thanos, I would have snapped it a few times personally. But I guess half the population will do for now. But I was actually pleasantly surprised. A movie that I didn't really plan to watch. It just kind of was on, and I just continued watching it. It was actually exciting to watch.
You know, the the thing with Infinity Wars, like the start to that movie is so intense where you just have the phone call and like the radio call, like this is the so and so, we're like here in space. And then you kind of like have the dramatic music, and then it just starts with Thanos monologuing. It's just Josh Brolin. And like the thing with the Infinity War like Avengers movies, it's written by the and directed by the same people who did Arrested Development. So like
Mm,
the dialogue has like a sort of rhythm where it feels like a sitcom, but it's a superhero movie. And I feel like that's the biggest pro to Marvel, where it doesn't take itself so seriously, but sometimes it has a tough time balancing it. Where in Infinity War, I feel like they balance the humor and the emotion in that movie a lot better, where there's actually like serious emotional moments in that movie. Like you
yeah.
made people care about like a robot and some girl's relationship together with like
Y-
Vision and Scarlet Witch.
Yeah. I think that the for superhero movies, I don't know where I would rank it amongst like some of my other personal favorites, but of all the Marvel movies, I just feel like Marvel movies are popcorn movies. There's not a lot of like digging deep into like the themes and schematics of it. I feel like there's not a lot there historically. My biggest beef, honestly, with Infinity War is the way they ended it with Endgame. Because Endgame, like, I'm sorry, if he can kill the population with a snap, you're not just gonna punch the shit out of him and beat him that way. Like, you just have all these fucking, you have the Hulk punching him, and you have Captain America hitting him with his shield. Like, dude, he is invincible at this point. You're not gonna beat this guy, but somehow they do in the typical Disney bullshit fashion. And I don't like that. I'm sorry. Thanos should not have died. They should have continued on with Thanos basically ruling the galaxy. And it should have ultimately become from the Avengers to the Thanos. And I would have probably preferred watching that over that.
Yeah.
If and the whole alternate reality bullshit that they've been doing since then, cringy, lame, boring, lazy writing as far as I'm concerned. Thanos should win, and I want to bring back Thanos. Just like we have resurrected other villains in the past, let Thanos be the villain that lives and continues to dominate.
Yeah, and the thing with Infinity War is that's a project they started in 2006, and the original idea was to center the entire universe around Tom Cruise playing Iron Man.
Oh
And then they're
God.
like, "Oh, we got that guy who was arrested for being a crackhead." They're like, all right, that's cool." And then they resurrect Robert Downey Jr.'s career. They release Iron Man, and they've been teasing Thanos since 2011. So you have that like 7 years of world building, and then you release it in 2018 and 2019, and it ends up paying off. Where it feels like when you watched Endgame, it was a cultural moment where it's just one of those movies where it came out like it's one of the few movies like Jaws had a huge impact on people when it came out. Star Wars did. I feel like Avatar's not a good movie, but it had its moment, and I feel like Infinity War is a better movie than Avatar, but like it like had a huge cultural impact when it came out. So like did you get
Hmm.
like kind of like how it kind of could have happened if you were like a major fan like of that universe and had
Oh,
watched
for
like
sure.
every movie up until then?
Yeah, I feel like that's a movie that didn't necessarily have to watch all of it beforehand. I feel like they had a good job recapping, getting us up to speed, getting into it. Um, and I think that I feel kind of left. I feel like I kind of missed out a little bit now looking back, which maybe I'd learned my lesson in the future. But yeah, like between Infinity War and Endgame, these were such massive cultural events over the course of the year. You had Thanos ultimately going in Fortnite, which was a massive moment for video games. And then just historic, like everywhere you went, it was fucking, whether it be online, whether it be in person, like everybody was talking about this movie. It felt like everybody watched this movie in theaters at the time. So I missed out. I'm like 7 years too late, but that's okay.
Yeah, honestly, like that movie kind of killed movies, to be honest, because like after that, like superhero movies, like everyone was trying to build their own universe. The X-Men were trying to do it. We almost had a monster verse with the Mummy. So the Mummy with Tom Cruise that came out a little bit ago, that was really bad. It was
Mm,
supposed to be like the start of like a monster verse that Sony was gonna do of like Dracula, like Wolfman and a couple different ones in it. Like it kind of killed cinema where everything had to be its own franchise. Sony tried to do it with Venom, and then they released Craven. And then after that, like Marvel hasn't been the same since Endgame. And like Endgame isn't as good of a movie. I like parts of the time travel because I watched like the franchise as it came out. So I think it's kind of like a love letter to the franchise, but I get like how the ending is kind of corny and cartoonish, especially with Captain Marvel just being like an OP character because they needed an OP character, so they wrote her into it, kind of like adding her in at the end. But like, I feel like it kind of did like it was like the last major movie theater moment, and we kind of really haven't had that for a movie ever since then. Maybe we had like Barbenheimer, but that's like been the biggest thing since.
yeah, I feel like we haven't had something to that echelon. It's like Marvel was always like this historical, like it was like a pop culture moment where everyone would line up for basically like the first 6 weeks of the movie coming out. People would be watching it multiple times. We saw that with Star Wars as well, which Star Wars ruined itself as well. Um, and every once in a while, there'd be like a random movie that caught a lot of attention, but we haven't really seen that. The closest thing was the Barbenheimer, like you mentioned, and definitely hasn't been any movies of 2025, and I can't think of any in 2024 either that had that same relevance. Both of these movies easily surpassed $2 billion box office, and it was just everywhere. Like these are the highest grossing films of all time. Some of these, I believe, that Endgame is the highest grossing movie of all time, if I'm not mistaken. So they were just everywhere, and they were massive. And these villains, Thanos is like one of the greatest villains of all time at this point.
Yeah, I love how memeable Thanos is. Like, my favorite, I like quote this line a lot in my daily life, just like doing things. But in the second movie, Endgame, when he's just like, I use the stones to destroy the stones.
Nice, yeah, lovely. Yeah, man.
Like, it
I
just
think
doesn't make any sense. They'll just like randomly like have like this complicated thing, and then they'll just have a plot point where like, how'd you destroy the stones? Like, I use the stones to destroy the stones. And they just have like these major plot errors.
yeah, that's my beef with Avengers, like just the Avenger franchise historically. But these are just kind of fun. You just watch them. A lot of pretty colors throughout the screen, and just have fun watching it. So I don't know. Maybe I'll watch the next Avengers if it comes out. If it's as big as these other ones, I think. What's the next one? Doomsday. Is that the next like big Avengers movie? I don't know what's next after this.
I think it's Secret Wars after this. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna be as big though, because like you kind of got rid of all of your main characters, and you haven't had really the only good Marvel movie after Endgame was Guardians of the Galaxy 3. But that's
Yeah.
kind of always been its own separate franchise because it's James Gunn. You have Bradley Cooper, Dave Batista, and Chris Pratt, and Zoe Saldana. So it's like kind of its own fun, like modern day, like Star Trek, Star Wars type franchise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And I think it's a different audience too, but it's cool. I don't know. Maybe I'll check out the next one. I think that the next one it looks like it's Doomsday, which comes out in 26. Maybe I'll watch that. I don't know. Fantastic Four comes out this year. We'll see if that's any good. Um,
Did you think like the humor in this like was too much? Like, what did you think of
yeah.
like Drax in this movie and like Rocket and like kind of Thor, how he talks?
Yeah, I just feel like the problem I have with Avengers movies is like they just try to insert humor, but it doesn't feel very organic. It's not like a naturally funny script. It's like it feels like the writers are writing the script. They're like, oh wait, let's make it something funny to take the edge off. Like no, it doesn't feel natural with the jokes a lot of the times. Infinity War did a little bit of a better job, but the humor, it's family humor. It just doesn't mean too much to me. But um, yeah, a lot of the times, especially with Endgame, it just felt like there'd be a really intense moment, and then they would make like a fart joke. I'm like, okay, very cool. Just taking this
Endgame's
out
like
of
a
it.
3 hour movie too. Like it's a commitment.
It's super long. I didn't get to finish it in one sequence either. I had to stop because it was just too long. I was like, okay, I've seen enough flashing bolts and fucking webs or whatever the fuck they're shooting at them. You know?
Yeah. And honestly, rewatching those movies, I'm like, Chris Evans is kind of a bad actor.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad actors in there, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. It was cool. I'll check it out again, but I'm not overly invested. I don't really care about the fate of the universe. I don't know much about the phases, but it's uh it's fun. They're in phase 6 now. The fuck? That's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It died after phase like 3 or 4.
Yeah, because they went into the multiverse saga. I think that's just lazy writing at that point, more often than not.
And it's like everything is multiverse now. So like now you can write back, you can fix any mistake you made or any plot like roadblock that you have. You can just use the multiverse to write it out. It's kind of lazy. It's kind of become the 3 point shot of movies these days where you have the multiverse. It's just a lazy
Yep.
way of getting around hard work and banging and making your shit with meat, like Porzingis said.
Yes, that's a good way to make it full circle. Because we started the show talking about the worst and best shooters of all time. Shout out Vlad Divac. And then we talked about the NBA. We talked about NFL latest and greatest. And then obviously concluding it with what we've been watching recently. So ultimately, as we conclude the show, appreciate everybody watching the show, whether it be now or later. Message that we always end the show with: stay brick. Oh, nice.